I am Samantha, a 35-year-old woman. I am blissfully married to my beloved husband, Douglas, and together we share a serene and delightful life with our 7-year-old son, Joseph, and our 4-year-old daughter, Christina. Douglas and I first met in the university cafeteria during our college days. Each of us was enjoying a cup of coffee with a book in hand when a spontaneous conversation sparked a deep and meaningful connection. Douglas, ever so calm and considerate, would attentively listen to my tales with a gentle patience that felt comforting. Over time, our friendship blossomed and evolved, and I came to realize that his presence in my life had become absolutely irreplaceable. His marriage proposal was beautifully simple. Beneath a canopy of beautifully blossoming trees, he shyly presented a ring and lovingly declared, "I want to be with you forever." His sincere words were all I needed to instantly agree with a nod, filled with deep emotion. Since that momentous day when we exchanged vows, we have found true happiness in our marriage. When our son Joseph was born, Douglas, with tears of joy cascading down his cheeks, tenderly murmured, "He's our treasure." Joseph is a vivacious and inquisitively spirited child who thrives outdoors. Every weekend, we embark on delightful family picnics, and observing him energetically run around fills my heart with an immense sense of joy and fulfillment. Soon after, we welcomed Christina into our lives. She was a bit delicate, diagnosed with a congenital condition from birth. Initially, our concerns were significant, but Douglas and I joined forces and committed to support her at every challenging step. Joseph, her protective older brother, cherishes his sister deeply and often says, "I will protect Christina." Witnessing their growth and bond develop has been the pinnacle of my joy. Another individual holds an extraordinarily special place in my heart, my grandmother, Helen. She is the epitome of grace and warmth, qualities I have admired and loved since my childhood. My mother, Kathy, divorced my father when I was quite young and swiftly remarried a man named Michael, with whom she had my half-sister, Ashley. As my mother immersed herself in her new family, I gradually felt that I was becoming an afterthought. While my mother and stepfather lavished Ashley with love and attention, I often felt overlooked and neglected. During family shopping trips, Ashley would frequently receive new shoes, whereas I was reminded, "The ones you have are still perfectly fine." However, my grandmother Helen always treated me differently. She would envelop me in her warm embraces and reassuringly say, "Samantha, you are my precious granddaughter." Whenever loneliness crept in, I found solace and comfort at her welcoming home. The affection I yearned for from my mother was seldom received, making my grandmother's presence a sanctuary for my heart. On significant occasions like my wedding and the births of my children, my parents and stepsister displayed minimal interest in my life. My wedding seemed more of a duty for my mother and Michael than a celebration. They attended out of obligation, rather than genuine desire to participate. My mother offered no comments on my wedding arrangements or my choice of dress, leaving me feeling as if my dreams and aspirations were dissolving into thin air, resulting in a lingering emptiness after the ceremony. When Joseph was born, my mother prioritized Ashley, bringing her to the hospital immediately after I gave birth. Yet her interest in my newborn was notably scant. Ashley's inquiries about the baby seemed driven by mere curiosity, her gaze detached and indifferent. I desperately longed for my mother to genuinely see and love my child, yet her focus remained fixed on Ashley, which rendered me feeling incredibly isolated and lonely within my own family. My mother, Ashley, and Michael appeared to form an impenetrable unit, leaving me feeling like an outsider, despite my deep affection and support for them. Coming to terms with this reality was challenging for me. I reflected on this situation repeatedly but could never fully reconcile these feelings. Eventually, I began to distance myself and view my familial relationships from a broader perspective. Nevertheless, my grandmother Helen was thrilled when I informed her of my decision to marry. When I shared the news, she wept tears of joy and exclaimed, "Congratulations, you made a wonderful choice." Her heartfelt words warmed me to my core and nearly brought me to tears myself. Helen sincerely wished for my happiness, which moved me and imprinted her kindness onto my soul. When I introduced Douglas to her for the first time, she greeted him warmly. Sensing his slight nervousness, she grasped his hand firmly and repeatedly urged him, "Please take good care of Samantha. I'm counting on you." Douglas, touched by her words, responded with a shy smile and expressed his profound gratitude. At that moment, I felt just how much my grandmother cherished me and the immense trust she placed in Douglas. When Joseph and Christina were born, her joy was boundless, far exceeding all my expectations. She adored our children profoundly. When Joseph took his first steps, Helen, with tears of happiness streaming down her face, jubilantly exclaimed, "Look, he can walk now." Whenever Christina offered a smile, Helen was utterly enchanted, often remarking joyfully, "Christina is starting to look like her mama." For my children, Helen was not merely a great-grandmother, she was a boundless source of unconditional love. For me, her enduring warmth and affection have been a foundational pillar of support, providing me with strength and courage through all of life's challenges. Helen harbored a deep love for Hawaii, and her home was adorned with vibrant Hawaiian paintings and ornaments which infused every room with a peaceful, tropical ambience. After the early loss of my grandfather, she chose to live independently, cherishing the memories they shared. In honor of their cherished past, she utilized the inheritance to purchase a cottage in Hawaii, a place imbued with their treasured memories which held special significance to her. The charming cottage stood majestically along the pristine beachfront, serving as a haven of peace and tranquility with each visit. After marrying, I frequently brought my family to stay at the cottage, alongside my beloved grandmother Helen. Known for her culinary prowess, Helen's lemon pie was particularly exceptional, its flavor unrivaled. Standing by her side in the kitchen, enveloped in the delightful aromas of sugar and butter, remains one of my most cherished memories. Douglas was equally enchanted by the serene ambience, often commenting with a contented smile, "This place is like heaven." Joseph joyfully sprinted along the sandy shores, while Christina adored sitting on Helen's lap, captivated by her enthralling stories. Helen's profound affection for my family was unmistakable. When she confided in me, "I plan to leave this cottage to you," my heart swelled with joy. The cottage was a repository of precious memories, and I envisioned creating similarly warm memories for my children. However, these blissful days were overshadowed when Helen fell gravely ill. I devoted myself to caring for her, but managing Christina's health complexities simultaneously proved to be a formidable challenge. Unbeknownst to me during this tumultuous period, my mother Kathy and stepfather Michael feigned concern for Helen while covertly plotting to claim her estate. The depth of my grief was profound when Helen passed away, but the revelation in her will shocked me even more. Helen had bequeathed not only the Hawaiian cottage, but also a substantial sum of money to me. Upon discovering this, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. It felt as though I could hear Helen's voice gently saying, "Samantha, the cottage and everything else are for you and your family." However, my mother and stepfather vehemently disagreed. They argued that it was unjust for me to inherit everything and strongly suggested that I transfer ownership of the cottage to Helen's brother, Thomas. I wanted to say no, but at that time, I was physically and mentally exhausted from caring for Christina and her medical expenses. I didn't have the energy to argue. Reluctantly, I succumbed to their pressure and handed the keys to Thomas, stating calmly, "We'll handle the paperwork when things settle down." The loss of Helen's cherished cottage was painful, yet I compelled myself to focus solely on Christina. After all, with my husband and children by my side, I felt I had sufficient joy in my life. Several weeks following Helen's passing, an unexpected disaster struck. Although there had been reports of an approaching hurricane days prior, the sheer magnitude of devastation it brought to our region was unforeseen. The storm's ferocity surpassed all expectations, engulfing the town in torrential rains and widespread flooding. On that fateful day, I remained home with Christina, whose frailty made her particularly vulnerable to the abrupt weather changes. So we stayed indoors to monitor the evolving situation. Meanwhile, Douglas and Joseph ventured to a nearby supermarket to procure supplies. Despite the streets beginning to flood, Douglas assured with a lighthearted, "We'll be back soon," while Joseph cheerfully promised, "I'll buy some snacks Christina likes." As they waved goodbye, little did I know those would be their final words. On their way back, they tried to cross a flooded road. At that moment, a surge of water swept their car away. When I heard about the accident on the news, I felt as if all the blood had drained from my body. I couldn't believe it, or perhaps I didn't want to believe it. In a state of panic, I rushed to the police station, frantically pleading for them to find Douglas and Joseph. However, after agonizing hours, a police officer solemnly shook his head and whispered, "I'm sorry." Douglas and Joseph were tragically lost to the floodwaters. My world shattered in an instant. Consumed by grief so intense it felt suffocating, I wept inconsolably. Christina was crying too, but I told myself I had to stay composed for her. Yet the depth of my loss felt immeasurable. There was much to be done, such as arranging the funeral. I set the date, contacted family and friends, and began preparing to say goodbye to Douglas and Joseph. Amidst this, I also informed my mother of the tragedy. Over the phone, after a moment of silence, she responded indifferently, "That's unfortunate." "When is the funeral?" she asked. "Next Saturday," I replied. "I can't make it," she said. "Why?" "I have plans to go to Hawaii." "You know Ashley recently lost her job and broke up with her boyfriend, right? So Michael and I planned a trip to cheer her up. It's been scheduled for a while, and it's difficult to cancel now." Her words were incomprehensible to me. Prioritizing a vacation over mourning the loss of her son-in-law and grandson? "Mom, are you serious?" I asked in a trembling voice. "Samantha, we can't just change our plans. Ashley is looking forward to this. Family died. Douglas and Joseph. And you're prioritizing a trip? Don't overreact, Samantha. I understand how you feel, but we have our plans." Speechless and heartbroken, I realized she had chosen a Hawaiian vacation for Ashley over attending the funeral of her son-in-law and grandson. Mixed with anger and profound sorrow, I ended the phone call, feeling a deep sense of betrayal and isolation. I was in disbelief. My mother had always shown a preference for Ashley over me, yet I had never imagined she could be so utterly heartless. On the somber day of the funeral, as I tried valiantly to suppress my tears, I tenderly placed Douglas and Joseph's favorite flowers atop their caskets, offering a silent, poignant farewell. The ceremony saw a considerable turnout, including many friends and relatives of Douglas, which provided a small comfort. Remarkably, even my estranged father and his side of the family, whom I had not seen for many years, made the effort to attend. Their presence and shared expressions of grief brought a slight solace amidst the overwhelming sorrow. In stark contrast, my mother, stepfather, and stepsister were conspicuously absent. They were already at the airport. I knew it instinctively. The image of them waiting in the airport lobby, laughing carelessly as they anticipated their flight, ignited a fury within me that was hard to contain. Such callousness was simply unforgivable. Engulfed in grief over the loss of my husband and son, I also felt a simmering anger toward them brewing quietly within me. Following the funeral, I decided to check the security cameras installed at the Hawaiian cottage. Seeing them arrive there casually, as if nothing had happened, solidified my resolve. I was determined not to let them get away with their indifference. I promptly called the police and reported them for trespassing, leading to their eviction from the cottage. When the police arrived and escorted them out, they were utterly bewildered. Frantically, they claimed that the cottage was supposed to belong to my grandmother's brother, Thomas, but their claims fell on deaf ears. The officers, having been informed by me that I was the legal owner and had not authorized their stay, shared this with my family, who were visibly shocked and confused. They had no choice but to find temporary accommodation in a nearby hotel. Shortly after the eviction, my mother called me in a rage. "What have you done, Samantha? Why would you do such a thing?" Her voice was thick with anger, and for a moment I was left speechless by her audacity. I was momentarily speechless, thinking, again, she only thinks of herself. I don't understand why this would be considered trespassing. We're family. It shouldn't be a problem for us to visit. She continued vehemently. I can't believe you would do such a thing. That cottage is supposed to belong to Thomas, isn't it? My heart grew even colder. In her words, I felt the overlap of my past pain and betrayal. She continued to assert her rights without acknowledging their wrongdoing. The last vestiges of warmth in my heart slowly solidified into ice. "Mom, please calm down and listen," I said calmly. "When you entered that cottage, I hadn't yet completed the legal paperwork. That means the cottage was still legally mine. I didn't know that. It's unbelievable that you would accuse your own family of trespassing. Do you know how much the hotel cost?" Her voice was still full of anger. "How could you do this? We're family." Despite her escalating anger, I held my ground. If we truly were family, then attending your son-in-law and grandson's funeral should have been your priority. I don't consider people who skip such a crucial family event as part of my family. This left her momentarily at a loss for words, but I seized the opportunity to express all the frustration and anger I had been holding back. "I no longer consider you family," I declared firmly, and ended the call. In the aftermath, I learned that my mother, stepfather, and stepsister cut their trip short and returned home earlier than intended. They had probably planned to stay at the cottage for several days, but now faced unexpected financial burdens due to the situation. Naturally, it seemed fitting that they experience some financial difficulties. Despite their return, my mother continued to aggressively blame me for the situation. Regardless of her indifference and betrayal, she insisted on portraying me as the one at fault. "You really did something terrible by betraying your own family," she repeatedly messaged me. I chose to ignore her messages, and over time, her words lost any impact on me. My heart had completely cooled towards them. Douglas had always been the primary breadwinner, providing a stable and comfortable lifestyle for our family. Over the years, I had consistently sent financial support to my parents, especially since my mother frequently requested assistance, and my stepfather often demanded financial help. Deep down, I never felt obligated to send them money. It was more about the expectation that I should support them. But after the loss of Douglas and Joseph, and particularly with my mother's glaring absence at the funeral, my resentment towards her reached its peak. Her decision to prioritize a leisure trip to Hawaii over mourning with her family was an unforgivable betrayal that left my heart ice cold. As a result, I decided to cease all financial support to them. The following month, when my mother realized the financial support had stopped, she called me in a panic. Every time the phone rang, a wave of disturbance washed over me, but I managed to maintain my composure. "Why haven't you sent the money? What do you mean by this?" she demanded over the phone. With a deep, steadying breath, I responded quietly but firmly, "I will no longer be sending you any financial support." After a stunned silence, my mother objected vehemently. "Why would you do this? You know we rely on your support. How are we supposed to live if you don't help us?" Her voice was filled with desperation and anger. At that moment, I realized I had fully come to terms with my decision. No matter how upset she became, I would not be swayed. I have no intention of continuing to send money anymore. "You didn't even attend the funeral." I see no reason to continue supporting people who chose to go on vacation in Hawaii rather than mourn the loss of my husband and son, I replied coldly. My mother's fury intensified at my words. You're such a cold child. To say such heartless things without any regard for me, she exclaimed. But I was no longer affected by her words. That's fine. I don't think there's anything more to discuss, I concluded, and hung up the phone for the last time. After ending the call, I reaffirmed my decision to have nothing more to do with these people. Afterwards, my mother and stepfather, who had been living off my support and their pensions, had to manage on just their pensions. According to relatives, Ashley, who had been fired from her job, had not found new employment and was still living at home. Their household finances were strained, even making it difficult to pay for utilities. The family that used to dine out frequently was now limited to frugal meals. My mother picked out discounted groceries with a sigh, and my stepfather struggled to find work, hindered by his age. The former liveliness was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that likely hung over their home. However, I felt no sympathy for them. I no longer felt obliged to solve their hardships. Protecting my own peace of mind was my top priority. From there, my mother and stepfather's behavior became increasingly desperate. They started showing up at my house unannounced, begging for money, and when refused, they would shout and wreak havoc. Fearing their unpredictable visits, I doubled the locks on my doors and installed security cameras. Each ring of the doorbell put me on edge, and I often pretended not to be home. I couldn't feel safe in my own house, becoming sensitive to every noise at night, which led to many sleepless nights. One day, when my mother tried to sneak into my house again, I immediately called the police. Upon their arrival, she was arrested on the spot, and the incident resulted in a criminal record for her. My mother and stepfather lost social credibility, struggled to find work due to their criminal records, and were unable to receive loans from banks. With no income, their financial difficulties worsened. Despite the severity of their ordeal, I could not find it in myself to sympathize. My heart had closed off to them. All I could do was quietly watch their betrayal. The fact that my mother and stepfather had skipped my husband and son's funeral to go on a trip to Hawaii became a major topic among relatives and was met with widespread criticism. They became distanced and isolated from everyone around them. Criticism towards her increased, and she lost support from family and friends, finding herself without anyone to rely on. Despite repeated apologies from my mother, my heart remained cold. I had no intention of accepting her apologies. I decided to look forward without dwelling on how much I had been hurt and vowed not to sacrifice myself to meet familial expectations anymore. Above all, I had something precious to protect Christina. Knowing her strength, I had to live strongly for her sake. To do this, cutting ties with my family and stopping any further financial support felt like the best course of action. With a resolve to not be bound by the past, I decided to completely separate myself from my family. Connections with my mother, stepfather, and stepsister had become meaningless to me. In my heart, my relationship with them had completely ended. I stopped all financial support and felt the weight of how much I had been compromising. From that day, I chose to proceed on my own, without relying on anyone. Christina and I moved to the Hawaiian cottage. In a room filled with warm sunlight and views of the tranquil sea, we started our new life. Christina gradually regained her strength, and as I supported her, I found new hope within myself. Now free from my family and past pains, I felt liberated. Despite the tears I had shed looking back, those tears were now for moving beyond my past, not returning to it. Sometimes, as Christina and I walked along the beach, I thought about how our difficult journey had shaped us. It made me appreciate our new life all the more. Christina, slowly reclaiming her smile, seemed to be overcoming something within herself. Since I made the decision to live strongly, our lives gradually became more peaceful, and I felt a new future unfolding for us. The end of my relationship with my family allowed me to reclaim myself. I deepened my bond with Christina and began to enjoy life again. Those moments made me truly glad I had cut ties with my family, and I looked forward to a future of freedom and renewal. Proud of being able to live looking forward, I decided to tread each step of my life firmly.